It was a quiet night, the kind that usually goes unnoticed. A teenager walking alone down a dimly lit street, his steps unhurried, his gaze steady. The town around him was silent, still, as though nothing could disturb its peace. Then it began. A faint rumble in the distance, low and persistent. It grew louder, closer, until the air itself seemed to vibrate. The unmistakable roar of engines broke the silence, a sound that demanded attention. The boy kept walking, unfazed, as the lights of approaching motorcycles sliced through the darkness. Voices followed, taunting, laughing, echoing in the night. The bikes closed in, surrounding him, circling like predators. Still he didn't stop. He didn't run. He stood there, calm, almost unnervingly so, as if he were waiting for something. What was he thinking? Why didn't he flinch, step back, or even speak? What would you do in his position? Could you stay calm? Could you stand your ground or run to hide? Tonight, questions like these would find their answers. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our stories. Give this video a like to show your support, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Nestled in the hills, it was the kind of town where life moved at a slower pace. Streets were lined with modest houses, their porches dimly lit, and the faint hum of crickets filled the night air. The town had a sense of familiarity, a place where everyone knew each other's routines, and quiet predictability was the norm. Among its residents was Canaan Benson. To most, Canaan was just another face in the crowd. He wasn't loud, he didn't seek attention, and he rarely strayed from his disciplined routines. But to those who noticed, there was something different about him. Canaan carried himself with quiet confidence, a kind of poise that made people wonder what lay beneath his composed exterior. He wasn't like most boys his age. Growing up in a quiet town where nothing ever seemed to change, he had always stood apart, not because he sought to, but because of the life he had quietly built for himself. From the outside, his days seemed ordinary. He went to school, kept his head down, and avoided unnecessary attention. But there was a part of Canaan's life that few knew about, a discipline that had shaped him into someone far beyond what others could see. Canaan's journey began when he was only 6 years old. His father, a man of few words but unshakable values, had introduced him to a reclusive martial arts master. This man, a former champion who had long retreated from the public eye, had a reputation for his demanding training and an almost impossible standard of discipline. It was in the dimly lit dojo, hidden at the edge of the forest, that Canaan spent his early mornings and long evenings. The training was relentless. Hours of repetition, perfecting every strike, every block, every movement until it became second nature. The master's methods were unorthodox and grueling, but they instilled in Canaan something that couldn't be taught in words, a deep sense of control, both over his body and his mind. While other kids his age played video games or joined sports teams, Canaan's world revolved around the dojo. The lessons he learned weren't just about fighting, they were about discipline, respect, and understanding the responsibility that came with power. Strength isn't about proving yourself to others, his master often reminded him. It's about knowing when to act and when to let go. But the path wasn't easy. In school, Canaan was often the target of bullies who mistook his quiet demeanor for weakness. They pushed, they provoked, and though he had the skills to defend himself, he chose restraint. His master's teachings echoed in his mind. Never strike in anger. Never let pride dictate your actions. To others it seemed like he was simply enduring, but for Canaan, every confrontation was a test of his ability to stay true to his values. Despite the challenges, he never wavered. His routine was unshakable. Each morning before the town woke, Canaan would rise with the sun and head to the park or a secluded clearing near the dojo. There, he practiced alone, his movements precise, his focus unbroken. He trained in silence, every motion deliberate, every stance a reflection of years of dedication. What many didn't realize was that his training wasn't just physical, it was mental. Hours of meditation taught him to master his emotions, to remain calm even in the face of chaos. This calmness became a part of him, something he carried with him everywhere he went. It wasn't about seeking out conflict. Kanan didn't see his skills as a way to prove himself. They were a shield, not a weapon. His goal was always to protect, not to harm. And so, while others underestimated him, Kanan never felt the need to correct them. He let them believe what they wanted, knowing that if the time ever came, he was prepared. But beneath the surface was a young man who had spent nearly his entire life mastering skills that few couldn't comprehend, skills that were far more than physical. They were a reflection of his character, his discipline, and his unwavering sense of purpose. Then there were the bikers, a group that everyone in town recognized, but no one dared confront. They weren't locals, but their presence was felt often enough to make them infamous. Their roaring engines shattered the stillness, and their antics left unease in their wake. They thrived on intimidation, pushing boundaries wherever they went. Stories of their reckless behavior had spread across town, from vandalized property to confrontations that left people shaken. For Kanan, the bikers were nothing more than background noise, a fleeting presence he paid no mind. But for the bikers, Kanan was different. He didn't avert his gaze when they passed, didn't shrink under the weight of their loud, imposing presence. To them, his calmness was unfamiliar, even provocative. On this particular evening, Kanan's quiet world collided with theirs. The streets were empty, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows as Kanan walked home alone. His steps were unhurried, his face unreadable, as if he had all the time in the world. And so, when the bikers chose to target him that night, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Kanan Benson wasn't just walking home. He was walking into a moment that would define everything he had trained for. That night, the bikers thought they had found an easy target, but they couldn't have been more wrong. Kanan had been passing through, walking the same route he always took. The air was still, the streets empty, save for the low rumble of motorcycles parked in a loose formation near an old diner. The bikers had gathered there as they often did, their voices loud, carrying across the otherwise quiet night. They laughed, shouted, and exchanged stories, their presence impossible to ignore. Kanan didn't give them more than a passing glance. His pace remained steady, his gaze forward. To him, they were just noise, something that existed outside his world. But to the bikers, his silence was louder than anything they'd heard all night. One of them noticed him first, nudging another and pointing in his direction. They watched him as he walked by, their laughter fading into murmurs. To them, his calmness was out of place, something to be questioned or challenged. "Hey, kid!" one of them shouted, his voice cutting through the stillness. Kanan didn't stop. He didn't even look back. The others joined in, their voices growing louder, taunts following him as he moved further away. "Too good to say hello?" another biker called out, his tone mocking. "Where you off to in such a hurry?" "I'm sorry, sir. I was told not to talk to strangers, sir," he answered politely without stopping. Another biker replied to him, "You're the stranger here. Look at your skin color. Were you not told that too?" They all laughed. Still, Kanan didn't respond. His master's teachings echoed in his mind. Engagement isn't always strength. Sometimes, walking away is the greater victory. But his indifference only seemed to fuel their interest. One of the bikers, a stocky man with a shaved head and a loud voice, stepped forward, waving for the others to follow. "Let's see where he's going," he said with a grin, revving his engine. The group mounted their bikes, their engines roaring to life as they pulled onto the street. They kept their distance at first, trailing him just far enough to let him know they were there. Their voices carried over the sound of the engines, laughter and jeers directed at his back. Kanan could hear them, but he didn't react. His steps remained measured, his breathing steady. He had no intention of engaging. Conflict was a choice, and he wasn't about to let them make that choice for him. But the bikers weren't ready to let it go. They accelerated, pulling ahead to block his path. Their headlights illuminated him, casting his shadow long against the pavement. The stocky biker dismounted first, standing squarely in Kanan's way. "What's the matter? Don't you talk again?" he asked, his tone a mix of amusement and challenge. Kanan looked at him, his expression calm, unreadable. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step to the side, as if to walk around. But the biker moved with him, blocking his path again. The others surrounded him now, their bikes forming a loose circle, their laughter echoing off the buildings. "Where you think you're going?" another biker asked, leaning forward on his handlebars. "We just want to talk." The tension in the air thickened as they closed in, their voices growing louder, their movements more deliberate. Kanan stood still, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, assessing every detail. He raised his hands slightly, palms open, a gesture of peace, not submission. "I'm just trying to get home," he said, his voice calm but firm. The stocky biker smirked, leaning closer. "Well, maybe you should have taken a different route. This one's ours." Kanan didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes, and for a moment it seemed to unsettle them, but they wouldn't let it show. They laughed again, louder this time, as if trying to drown out whatever unease they might have felt. As the seconds dragged on, it became clear they weren't going to let him go without a reaction. They wanted something, fear, anger, anything to prove they were in control. But Kanan gave them nothing. And yet, something about the way he stood there, calm and unshaken, seemed to challenge their confidence. The stocky biker frowned, his amusement fading. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" he asked, his tone sharp now. Kanan met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I don't think anything," he said simply. The biker's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. The others watched, their laughter fading as they waited to see what would happen next. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. Kanan remained still, his hands at his sides, his breathing slow and steady. To him, this wasn't a fight, not yet, but he could feel the line they were trying to cross, the moment they were pushing toward. "I'm giving you a chance," Kanan said, his voice steady. "You don't want to do this." The bikers erupted in laughter, their voices bouncing off the walls of the empty buildings. The leader stepped closer, pointing at Kanan with exaggerated amusement. "Do what? What exactly are we doing? You're the one who's going to tell us to stop?" Kanan held his gaze unflinching. His posture remained calm, his hands still at his sides, but his eyes told a different story, one of unwavering certainty. The leader mistook his composure for hesitation. Turning back to his group, he threw up his arms, playing to the crowd. "He thinks he's got something up his sleeve." The others howled with laughter, revving their engines as if to intimidate him further. But their commotion wasn't as private as they assumed. In the nearby houses, windows began to light up, curtains parted, and curious faces peered out into the night. The noise had drawn attention, and the townspeople, long accustomed to avoiding the bikers, watched silently. To their surprise, it wasn't the bikers in control this time. It was the lone figure standing in the center of the chaos. For the first time in years, someone wasn't backing down. The leader turned back to Kanan, his grin fading slightly. He stepped closer, shoving Kanan's shoulder. "Come on, kid. Show us what you've got." If you're enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to click the notification bell and let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. It happened faster than anyone could process. The moment the leader's hand made contact, Kanan moved. In a single fluid motion, he deflected the shove with his arm, stepped into the leader's space, and redirected him with just enough force to send him stumbling backward. The crowd watching from their windows collectively gasped. The bikers' laughter died abruptly, replaced with stunned silence. The leader caught his balance, glaring at Kanan with disbelief. One of the younger bikers, eager to salvage their pride, stepped forward aggressively. "You think you're tough?" he barked, throwing a wild punch. Kanan didn't flinch. He sidestepped the punch with ease, his hand catching the biker's wrist mid-swing. With a swift twist, he redirected the momentum, sending the biker sprawling to the ground. The man scrambled up, clutching his arm, his bravado now replaced with confusion. The other bikers hesitated. Their initial confidence began to waver as they realized this wasn't going the way they had imagined. But hesitation quickly turned to anger. They revved their engines, shouting insults as they prepared to surround him. The neighbors watched with bated breath, their eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. This was no ordinary confrontation, and it wasn't just about Kanan anymore. It was a moment of vindication for a town that had endured the bikers' antics for far too long. As the bikers moved to attack, Kanan didn't wait. His movements were a blur of precision and control. One biker swung a chain, and Kanan ducked low, stepping inside their guard to disarm them in a single, swift motion. Another lunged at him, but Kanan used their momentum to send them tumbling into their bike. His strikes weren't meant to harm. They were meant to disable, to neutralize. Every movement was calculated, deliberate, and efficient. The bikers quickly found themselves outmatched, their numbers offering no advantage against someone who seemed to predict their every move. The neighbors began murmuring to one another, their excitement growing with every second. They had spent years living in quiet frustration, watching the bikers intimidate and harass anyone who crossed their path. But tonight, they were witnessing something entirely different.
"He's teaching them a lesson,"
one man muttered, his voice tinged with awe. "About time," another whispered, a hint of a smile on her face. Back on the street, the leader of the bikers stood frozen, watching as Kanan dismantled his crew with calm efficiency. His fists clenched, his pride bruised, as he realized how badly he had miscalculated. Kanan finally turned to him, his breathing steady, his gaze unwavering. "It doesn't have to get worse," he said, his tone calm but firm. The leader hesitated, his confidence crumbling under the weight of the moment. Around him, his gang lay scattered, their attempts to regain control thwarted at every turn. The onlookers at their windows waited, holding their breath, as the leader lowered his gaze and stepped back. For the first time, the bikers retreated, not with the loud bravado they had arrived with, but in stunned, uneasy silence. One by one, they mounted their bikes and rode away, their engines fading into the night. Kanan stood there for a moment, the tension in the air slowly dissipating. The neighbors watched as he adjusted his jacket, his movements calm and unhurried, before continuing down the road as if nothing had happened. From behind the curtains, someone muttered, "He did it. He stood up to them." Another replied, their voice filled with quiet admiration, "I don't think they'll be back." As the sound of the bikers' engines faded into the distance, the street fell silent again. The tension that had gripped the night lifted, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves and the soft glow of windows where neighbors still watched, captivated by what they had just witnessed. Kanan stood motionless for a moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He exhaled slowly, the calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the confrontation unbroken. There was no sense of victory in his expression, no trace of triumph, just quiet reflection. For Kanan, this was never about defeating anyone. It was about preventing harm, about showing strength without seeking conflict. The neighbors began to step away from their windows, their murmurs of excitement and disbelief lingering in the air. News of what had happened spread quickly. By morning, nearly everyone in the small town had heard the story. How Kanan Benson, the quiet young man so many had overlooked, had stood his ground against the bikers and sent them away without raising his voice or breaking his principles. For years, the bikers had loomed over the town as an unshakable force, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. But now, something had shifted. Canaan had shown them a different kind of strength, one rooted not in intimidation, but in discipline, restraint, and purpose. In the days that followed, the bikers didn't return. Their absence was noticed, but no one seemed eager to ask why. The few who had seen the confrontation firsthand spoke of the way Canaan had moved, the calm precision with which he had neutralized each threat. They described it not as a fight, but as something almost methodical, controlled. Even the bikers themselves had changed. Those who had mocked and jeered that night now spoke of Canaan with a mix of respect and caution. They didn't talk about revenge or retribution. Instead, they seemed to carry the weight of the lesson he had taught them. Some even began to change their ways, no longer seeking to intimidate or provoke as they had before. Canaan, meanwhile, returned to his routine. Each morning, as the sun rose over the quiet town, he could be found in the park or the clearing near the dojo, practicing the movements that had become a part of who he was. For him, the confrontation wasn't an event to dwell on, but a reminder of the responsibility that came with his skills. Strength, he knew, wasn't about overpowering others. It was about knowing when and how to use it. To the people of the town, however, Canaan had become more than just a quiet figure in the background. He was a symbol of courage and integrity, a reminder that even the most unassuming among them could rise to meet a challenge. They didn't see him as a hero in the traditional sense. He didn't seek recognition or praise. But in their hearts, they knew what he had done for them. Strength isn't about domination. It's not about proving yourself through intimidation or force. True strength lies in discipline, the ability to remain calm in the face of chaos, and in the choice to act with purpose and compassion. Canaan didn't stand his ground that night to prove he was stronger. He did it because he understood the weight of his abilities and the responsibility that came with them. He showed us that power isn't in the fight. It's in the restraint, in knowing when to act and when to step away. As you think about Canaan's story, ask yourself, what would you have done in his place? How would you handle a moment where your strength, whether physical, emotional, or mental, is tested? But more importantly, consider this. What skills or strengths do you hold that others might underestimate? How can you use them not to intimidate or overpower, but to inspire, protect, and uplift those around you? This story isn't just about Canaan. It's about all of us and the choices we make when faced with challenges. Remember, true strength isn't in the confrontation. It's in the courage to stand for what's right, even when no one expects you to. If you found this story inspiring, give it a thumbs up and share it. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories like this. And don't forget to comment with where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.